The obese bride was mocked, until the cowboy's little girl said, "She is pretty daddy." November skies lay heavy, a sheet of leaden gray draped across Montana, 1885. Inside Snow Pine's wooden church candles flickered their unsteady light, casting solemn shadows across the townsfolk's faces. Hats removed hands, clutching handkerchiefs. They sat in silence, listening to the hymn that mourned sons who had fallen on distant battlefields. Suddenly, the church doors burst open. A gust of cold swept in, carrying with it flurries of snow. And then Hannah appeared, not in the mourning black worn by the others, but in a faded wedding gown, ivory turned yellowed, creased with age, yet still shining faintly against the gloom. In her gloved hands trembled a single white lily. Every eye turned to her. A whisper rose, "Is that her wedding dress?" Another voice, sharp as a needle, "Has she lost her mind? She looks ridiculous." Laughter followed from one corner, cutting cruel and cold. Still, Hannah walked forward. Each step fell heavy against the wooden floor, louder than the hymn that had just died away. She did not stop, did not bow her head, yet her eyes filled with memory and pain, searched desperately for a place of refuge. And there, on the snow-dusted porch, stood a lone cowboy. Weston Dyer, draped in a brown coat, wide-brimmed hat pulled low, watched her silently. No mockery, no contempt, only a steady gaze like a small flame burning against the storm. In a place where personal sorrow was crushed beneath collective scorn, those eyes became recognition. And from that moment, Hannah's story began. Part 1. The handkerchief in the snow. The winter wind swept down from the distant mountains, shrieking through the old wooden boards of Snow Pine Church's porch. Snowflakes whirled, stinging Hannah's face like tiny needles. She stepped out through the door that had slammed behind her breath, ragged chest heaving beneath the faded wedding gown. In her hand, the lily trembled its petals, brushing against each other with the soft, broken sound of a stifled sob. The whispers inside had not faded. Though the door stood closed, the scraps of cruel laughter and biting words seeped out, clinging to Hannah like shadows to a lantern. Look, she wore a wedding dress to the memorial. Who does she think she is, ridiculous? The ridicule did not need to be clear. It only needed to be sharp enough to tear a soul apart. And Hannah heard every word. She stopped at one of the porch posts, her back pressed against the cold surface, gloved hand, brushing over its cracks worn by years. Once painted white, the wood now stood mottled and blackened by too many winters. Like her life, once bright, now dimmed and scarred by time and by the harsh gaze of others. She drew in a breath, resin and candle wax mingling with the cold air. I did the right thing, she told herself. I only wanted to honor James as he once wished. But the thought splintered beneath another memory. James, pressing his lips to her hand, here in this very chapel, when smiles, not laughter, had filled the pews. The lily shook harder. She clenched it until the stem snapped with a brittle crack. A tear slipped free, freezing almost instantly in the wind. She felt small, unbearably small, like a pebble tossed in a current too strong to resist. Her legs longed to flee, yet her heart anchored her here. For if she left now, she feared James's memory would be swallowed whole by their mocking voices. The darkness on the porch shifted. A figure stepped away from the post. Hannah startled, heart hammering, as though caught in her weakest moment. The man did not speak at once. He adjusted the brim of his wide hat against the falling snow. then slid his hands into the worn leather coat. Broad shoulders, a straight stance, and eyes gray still as the sky before a storm fixed quietly on her. Weston Dyer. She knew the name, as did everyone in town. The widowed cowboy. The man who lived withdrawn with his little daughter on Hollow Ridge. They said he was cold as stone, that he cared only for cattle and land. But in this moment, his eyes carried something different, like embers hidden deep in ash warmth, guarded but real. I saw what they did, Weston said, his voice low, steady. Each word dropped to the wooden boards like a stone cast into still water, without splash, but rippling outward all the same. Hannah froze. She wanted to look away for today. Every glance felt like a warped mirror reflecting her shame. But his voice carried no blade, no derision. Only weight like a hand placed gently on trembling shoulders. I only wanted to remember him, she stammered, breath clouding in the cold. The words tumbled out like a confession, as though defending the madness others had named. Weston gave the faintest nod. No questions, no probing. From his coat, he drew out a handkerchief. Its white was tinged with age, its edge stitched in rough thread, not fine, but strong. He held it out, not too close, to force not too far to distance. Just enough, as if laying a small bridge between them. Hannah hesitated. Her hands trembled, then reached. The fabric touched her fingers, warm, startlingly warm, as if reminding her she had been frozen too long. A faint scent of herbal soap rose from it, and memory surged. James had once used the same kind. Pain lanced her chest, but curiously, the pain was gentled by a strange, quiet comfort. Why? Do you care? The question slipped out frail, almost pleading. Her voice was hoarse, as though each word weighed a stone against her lungs. Weston did not rush his answer. He stood steady, eyes narrowed against the storm gaze still resting on her. Then slowly, firmly, he said, "Everyone deserves to be seen with respect. Nothing more, nothing less. No sermon, no pity. Only a truth solid as fence posts, driven deep into frozen ground." Hannah stilled. The words were small, yet they echoed within her like a bell's toll. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her in that tone, not belittling, not condescending, not scornful, simply recognizing her. And that simple act eased the crushing stone upon her heart. Tears spilled hot against the cold. She pressed the handkerchief to her eyes. The fabric drank her grief as though it could hold it for her. Her breath steadied, trembling less. For the first time since stepping into the church, she felt not entirely alone. The wind rose. Snow thickened, clinging to Weston's hair and hat crowning him in white. Hannah lifted her gaze, seeing in his stance a strange solidity, like the world could mock. But here stood one man who said without words that she was worthy of respect. Her eyes lowered. Softly she whispered, "This dress. I thought if I wore it, people would remember that once I was chosen. That once someone looked at me and said, 'I do.'" Her voice broke. I feared, if I didn't wear it, they would forget. Weston was silent a long while. He did not deny, nor did he console too quickly. His gaze turned to the falling snow, and then he spoke, voice low, as wood splitting in a fire. "It reminded me. Only that." Yet for Hannah, it was enough. Enough for her trembling heart to catch hold of a small, steady flame. Inside the church doors opened again. Footsteps and stairs spilled out onto the porch. Panic struck Hannah. She moved to shrink against the post. But Weston shifted quiet and calm, standing between her and them. Not in defiance, not in force, simply as a wall granting her breath. and in the icy wind, for the first time in years, Hannah believed she was not invisible. One small truth, one warm handkerchief was enough to pull her back from the brink. That winter night, what a cowboy offered a scorned widow was not fine words, but recognition. And sometimes that alone is enough to save a soul from drowning. Part 2. An unexpected invitation. The late winter sun sank slowly, leaving a wash of red across the Montana plains. The dirt road leading to Hollow Ridge was narrow and winding, fenced on both sides, with gray boards weathered by wind and snow. Hannah walked beside Weston, the withered lily tucked into her coat sleeve. She did not know why she still followed him, only that her steps felt guided by a force beyond her will. They reached the gate of Hollow Ridge as the sun dwindled to a faint streak on the horizon. The fences stretched long and unbroken posts, standing upright like old soldiers on guard. Beyond them, a simple wooden house appeared, its chimney smoke rising thin into the mist. Weston stopped, pulled off his leather gloves, and rested one hand against the gatepost. Hannah halted too, keeping the space of a single breath between them. She stared at the gate, as though it marked another world, a place she was not certain she had the right to enter. Silence stretched. Only the wind whistled through the slats. Only the posts creaked as though waiting for a word. At last, Weston spoke. His voice was low, short, yet each word landed with the solidity of a nail driven into wood. This ranch could use another set of hands. And he paused, his eyes resting briefly on Hannah. This home needs someone to keep the fire lit inside. Hannah blinked, uncertain she had heard right. She clutched the wilted flower tighter, breath catching in her chest. You mean, you want me? I want to hire you. Weston cut in plain and direct. Housework? And his voice softened, his gaze shifting with a trace of gentleness. Someone to look after the girl. The wind swept harder, carrying snow over the fence. Hannah stepped back half a pace, her body trembling. Never had she heard an offer so sudden, and one that sent her heart racing in such a way. But I don't know housework. I can't cook properly. I'm no good at keeping things tidy, she said, shaking her head, shame and worry in her voice. I fear I'd only trouble you. Weston folded his arms, leaning lightly against the rail. His posture remained steady, unmoved. I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for decent. And his eyes turned toward the wooden house where chimney smoke still rose. Isla needs someone gentle, someone patient. That matters more than all the rest. At the sound of the child's name, Hannah's heart softened. She remembered Isla's wide-eyed curiosity, her clear, sweet smile when she had run to call Daddy days before. That smile was nothing like the scornful laughter in the church. It held no judgment, only innocence and trust. Hannah lowered her gaze, fingers brushing the edge of the handkerchief in her pocket, the one Weston had given her. Its stitches were rough, uneven, but warm. It was the only thing in years that had made her feel seen. And now he held out another chance to step past this gate into something new. But fear rose. In her mind echoed the town's voices. Who would take her in? She only brings trouble. A burden. Her throat tightened. She half wanted to turn and flee. Weston seemed to read the turmoil in her eyes. He straightened his voice, firm but not harsh. I don't hire out of pity. I hire out of need. You need a place to stand, and I need hands that won't turn away when the world mocks. The words were simple, steady, like an anchor, dropped into rushing water. Hannah lifted her gaze and met his. In his eyes, there was no judgment, no plea, only conviction. Her throat constricted. For a moment, she felt herself at a crossroads to return to her cold, rented room where loneliness and mockery would hound her forever, or to step through this gate into a place unknown, full of risk, but also of hope. A small voice rang out from the house. "Daddy." Isla came running, cheeks flushed red in the cold, her golden hair tangled in the wind. She stopped, looked at Hannah with bright eyes, and beamed. Hannah's heart faltered. That smile was an invitation truer than any contract. She bent, brushing back Isla's tousled hair. The girl clasped her hand warm enough to draw tears to Hannah's eyes. Weston stepped closer, his voice low, resolute. "This gate is open. All it takes is one word, yes." Hannah was silent for a long while. The wind still howled, the snow still fell, but within another sound rose a faint, steady whisper from her own heart. She nodded, as though agreeing not only with Weston, but with herself, that she was worthy of another chance. Isla squealed, bouncing, squeezing Hannah's hand. Weston gave only the smallest nod. No broad smile, but his eyes shone with quiet warmth. And so beneath the gray winter sky, before the wooden gates of Hollow Ridge, a silent pact was struck, a cowboy in need of kindness, a widow in need of recognition, and a child in need of a hand to hold. It was the moment hope began to rise again out of what the snow had long tried to bury. Part 3. The Stranger in the Cabin. The Hollow Ridge cabin, nestled at the foot of a ridge of pines, its roof buried under such a heavy quilt of snow that each gust of wind sent white sheets sliding down like blankets shaken free. The smoke-darkened timbers, the small windows blurred with frost, and the chimney's steady plume were the only signs of life against Montana's brutal winter. On her first day, stepping across its threshold, Hannah's heart pounded, part guest, part trespasser. Weston had opened the gate for her. Isla had tugged her hand inside, yet every footfall on the wooden floorboards felt as though she were entering foreign ground, where any glance might become a verdict. The house was small. One room joined to the kitchen, 2 little bedrooms, a scattering of rough-hewn furniture. To Hannah, it was both strange and frightening. For here she could no longer hide behind the walls of a church or the shabby walls of her boarding room. Here her clumsy hands would be seen, and she knew she had no gift for household work. On the first morning, she rose early, hoping at least to prepare a meal. But the cast-iron pot on the wood stove seemed to fight her. She added too much water, then stoked the fire so high that it boiled over, splattering everywhere. The sharp scent of scorched onions filled the room, burning her eyes. When Weston entered, she dropped to her knees, scrubbing furiously, face burning with shame. He merely set down a bucket of water near the stove, his voice even, "For you," still warm. No reproach, no frown. He turned and left, while Hannah stood frozen, rag trembling in her hands. What lingered was a strange sensation, gratitude knotted with unease, as though his silence unsettled her more than scolding would have. On the second day, she tried laundry. The icy water cut into her hands, numbing her fingers. She scrubbed too hard, tearing a faded shirt of Weston's. Later, when she hung it outside, she sat on the porch step, throat tight. "I can't do this. Sooner or later, he'll send me away." That evening, when she brought the clothes, and the shirt was mended, stitched in small, careful lines. It could not have been Isla. Weston had done it quietly without a word. That same night, while making Isla's bed, Hannah smoothed the sheets and tucked the quilt just so. The girl giggled, then kicked it all loose, burrowing into the mess like a little bird in its nest. Hannah froze unsure. Weston, seated by the door, simply said, "Leave it. She likes it that way." No correction, no reminder of her mistakes. Only a quiet return to what was normal for his child. So the first days in the cabin became a string of failures. She spilled water hauling from the well. She dropped and shattered a ceramic bowl. She fumbled so often that some nights she longed to pack her things and slip away in the dark. Each time she told herself, "They'll soon see I'm useless. They'll regret bringing me here." But Weston never spoke a word of censure. Instead, he left small, silent traces that Hannah discovered later. A dry cloth hung near the stove after she soaked the floor. A bucket of warm water waiting by the door when she was at the wash. A folded handkerchief left beside her pillow at night. A hard candy on the small table where she often sewed. No notes, no words, just the quiet presence of a man who noticed when someone faltered and reached out without display. Hannah began to see that Hollow Ridge cabin was unlike any place she had known. It was not grand, not comfortable, but each day revealed a corner of warmth. And that warmth frightened her, for it was too rare, too precious for someone long accustomed to scorn. One evening, while Isla sketched with a stub of pencil on brown paper, Hannah sat in the corner needle trembling in her hand. The child sang nonsense softly, then suddenly bounded over, holding up her drawing. "Look, pretty lady," Isla beamed. Hannah's heart clenched. The drawing was rough, a round face with wide eyes, a dress aflower, uneven childish, but the little girl had called it pretty. Biting her lip, Hannah blinked back tears and whispered, "Thank you, Isla." From the corner, Weston said nothing, but Hannah noticed him fold the drawing carefully and tuck it into the pocket over his heart. No words, but the gesture spoke louder than any praise. That night, when Hannah returned to her room, she found a folded towel on her bed, still warm from the hearth. Atop it lay a single hard candy. No note, no inscription, only a quiet kindness that made her sit on the edge of the bed and weep tears that no longer tasted of humiliation, but of a fragile hope. In that small cabin through the harsh winter, Hannah was still clumsy, still self-doubting. Yet she began to sense something new perhaps. For the first time in years, she was not invisible. Recognition did not always come in grand words. Sometimes it came in a dry cloth, a bucket of warm water, or a candy left in the night. They were small signs, but to Hannah, they were larger than anything else. For in her heart, a quiet question was becoming a belief. Perhaps here at Hollow Ridge, I am allowed to stay. Part 4. Pretty Lady Night fell slowly over Hollow Ridge, a thick black blanket draped across the wide prairie. The sky glittered with stars trembling in the wind. But inside the small cabin, the only light came from the oil lamp on the wooden table. Its golden flame cast 3 shadows on the walls: a silent man, a woman bent over her stitching, and a child sprawled on the floor with paper and pencil. Isla lay on her stomach, tousled blonde hair spilling over flushed cheeks. The scratch of her pencil filled the room with its steady rasp, as though the world itself had shrunk to the lines she drew. Beside her sat Hannah in a plain homespun dress, fingers fumbling with needle and thread as she tried to mend a torn shirt. Now and then, she glanced at Isla, her heart softening at the child's absorbed expression. Weston sat by the hearth leather clothes dusted with snow-calloused hands, working at a broken bridle. He said nothing, barely lifting his head, though his gaze flicked often toward his daughter. For him, the scratch of Isla's pencil was as familiar as a hymn background music that eased the heavy silence of winter. Hannah was about to ask Isla what she was drawing when the girl suddenly looked up, face bright. "Look," Isla cried, eyes shining under the lamplight. Hannah bent to see the brown scrap of paper. There it was, a round face, 2 wide eyes, a long dress flowing, and in the hand a flower. Childish lines, uneven and unbalanced. Yet Isla beamed proud, as though she had drawn an entire world. "Pretty Lady Isla," said her voice clear as a bell, drawing the words out like a song. Hannah froze. The word "pretty" pierced her, cutting backward through years of armor built from shame. How long had it been? How long since anyone had called her that? Perhaps James long ago, before the town twisted the word into a weapon of mockery. Before pretty became a sneer, a whisper, a cruel laugh behind her back. "Pretty lady." Isla said it again, firmer this time, as though she would not allow Hannah to doubt. Hannah's throat tightened. She bit her lip, fighting tears. In the child's eyes, she was not a joke, not the fat, foolish bride, not the abandoned woman. She was simply a lady, a beautiful one. "Thank you, Isla Hannah," whispered her voice trembling. She leaned close, meeting the girl's clear gaze. Isla smiled, unbothered by the wrinkles in Hannah's dress or the tears slipping down her cheeks. The smile was simple, innocent, as though truth needed no proof Hannah was a pretty lady. From the corner, Weston set down the bridle. He rose, walked slowly forward, and took the drawing from his daughter's hands. He studied it for a long while. The picture was crude, bearing little likeness, but the light in Isla's eyes made it the truest portrait. Weston said nothing. He folded the paper carefully, gently, and tucked it into the pocket over his heart. Hannah saw. She saw the rough hand treat the drawing as though it were treasure. She longed to ask why, to know his thoughts, but her lips stayed closed. In his eyes, she read no pity, no pretense. Only a silent, steady acknowledgement. The oil lamp flickered shadows shifting against the cabin walls. Hannah sat still, fingers resting on the fabric in her lap. Her heart raced, yet no longer sank beneath its weight. Something softened within her, small but persistent, as if a flame had seeped into the cracks of the cold house. Isla leapt into Hannah's lap, golden hair spilling across her skirt. "Pretty lady," she whispered again, as though it were a secret between them. Hannah wrapped her arms around the little body, feeling its warmth, its heartbeat. Tears came, but this time there was no shame in them. Weston returned to his seat by the fire. He spoke no word, only watched the two figures, a fragile woman and a bright child, finding each other in a moment of pure simplicity. The cabin had been quiet too long. Now, the sound of a soft laugh, the whisper of "pretty lady," was new music in its walls. That night, when Hannah went to her room, she found a folded towel laid on her pillow, still warm from the hearth. On it lay a single amber candy. No note, no explanation, but she knew whose hand had placed it there. Hannah held the candy in her palm, warmth rising through her. It was not charity. It was not pity. It was a reminder that here at least one man and one child had seen her not as a joke, but as a woman worthy of being called beautiful. She sat on the bed's edge, the candy in her hand, eyes fixed on the dying fire's glow. Fear still lingered, shadows still pressed close. But for the first time in years, a narrow beam of light had broken through. And from that light, a voice still echoed, "Pretty lady." Part 5. The Thunder of Hooves. Morning broke clear over Montana. The pale sky stretched across the vast prairie. Dew clung to each blade of grass, sparkling under the thin sunlight. A breeze drifted down from the distant mountains, carrying the sharp scent of damp earth and dry pine. Hollow Ridge lay like a painting of peace, untouched, unbroken. Hannah had just hung a sheet to dry on the line behind the cabin. The wind caught its white edge, snapping it like a small sail. She breathed deeply, her heart a little lighter, though the fear of making some mistake still lingered in her chest. A peal of laughter rang across the field beyond the fence. Hannah turned and saw Isla, running, golden hair streaming like silk in the breeze, her little boots thudding against the hard ground. The girl swung a stick like a magic wand, humming a tuneless song. But Hannah's smile died. Behind Isla, only yards away, grazed 3 wild horses, huge, restless creatures with manes whipped high by the wind. One of them, a silver stallion, lifted its head, snorting, pawing at the earth as if ready to charge. Isla Hannah's cry tore through the air. The child froze, eyes wide, not yet understanding. In that instant, the silver horse screamed and lunged forward. Hannah didn't think, didn't hesitate. She ran, her dress tangled hem dragging through wet grass, but her legs pounded on breath, sharp heart exploding in her chest. The world blurred, except for the small figure standing frozen in the field. Hannah Weston's shout came from behind, but she barely heard it. A few strides more, the hooves would strike. Hannah threw herself forward, seizing Isla, twisting so her back faced the charging stallion. The world roared, pounding hooves, shattering earth, gasping breath. Crash. The horse thundered past, so close, the ground shook beneath them. Dirt and grass flew. Hannah hit the earth hard, clutching Isla to her chest. Heartbeat wild, waiting for the blow. But only the sound of hooves fading into distance came. A strong arm pulled them upright. Weston. He drew them both into his chest. Breath ragged, gray eyes wide with fear. "Are you hurt?" His voice. Rasped hands, running over Hannah's shoulders, her back searching for injury. Isla sobbed, burying her face in Hannah's chest, while Hannah herself shook with cold sweat. I'm fine," she stammered. The girl, "You saved her, Weston," cut in his voice, rough. His gaze locked on hers, filled with terror, gratitude, and something else, respect. They sank to the ground together, the 3 of them huddled close as the wind howled and dust settled. Isla still wept, but her tiny hand clung fiercely to Hannah's dress, unwilling to let go. At last, Weston spoke again, his tone low but steady. "You didn't think of yourself, only of Isla." Hannah bowed her head, breath shaking. "I just knew she needed me, that's all." Weston was silent, replaying the sight in his mind. The woman mocked by the town, the one they called useless, hurling herself into danger to save his daughter. A thing not everyone would dare. Slowly, he said each word, heavy yet true. "Hannah, you are far more important than you believe." Hannah lifted her gaze, eyes blurred with tears. She could scarcely believe she had heard him right. For years, her ears had known only mockery, dismissal. But now, from this quiet man came recognition. Not for her past, not for her appearance, but for her courage. A tear slid down her cheek, unashamed. Isla pressed her wet face against Hannah's chest, whispering through hiccups, "Don't leave me, pretty lady." Hannah's heart broke open. She clutched the child tight, murmuring, "I won't, sweetheart. I won't." Weston watched them, his throat tight. In his eyes, Hannah was no longer the lost figure in a faded wedding gown. She was a woman who had proved by action that she was worthy of trust, worthy of honor. The wind eased. The prairie lay calm again. But inside Weston, a storm had risen, one that bore a name, Hannah Whitfield. Part 6. The Return of Rumors. Afternoon draped snow pine in a pale golden dust. The slanted sun spilled across the narrow streets, glinting off the windows of the general store, the blacksmith shop, and the noisy saloon. Hannah walked the boardwalk with a basket of apples in her arms, fingers clenching the handle until her knuckles whitened. From behind came the whispers, "That's her." The crazy bride in the old dress. Another voice slipped in. "I heard she was run out of Red Valley, caught up in some scandal." The words were fragments, but sharp enough to drive old knives back into her heart. Hannah drew a deep breath, forcing her steps straight. "Ignore it, Hannah. Just finish your errands and go back to Hollow Ridge." But then a familiar voice cut through the street, shattering her fragile defenses. "Well, well, if it isn't the bride of Red Valley." She froze. Samuel Price stood a few paces away. Long coat, neat gloves, polished hair slicked back. His smile gleamed like a hidden blade shining but cold. "Samuel." Hannah whispered, her basket trembling in her grip. He advanced slowly, pale blue eyes inspecting her with cruel leisure. "Surprising to see you tucked away in a place like this. I'd heard the rumors, but I had to see with my own eyes." "What do you want?" Hannah tried to steady her voice, though her throat was dry. "To help you, of course." Samuel tilted his head tone smooth as oil. "Your name in Red Valley is tarnished, but I can fix it. A few letters, a few words in the right ears. All you'd need to do is..." His voice dropped, eyes darkening. "Finish what you once began." Memories struck like blows. Sweet promises turned to betrayal. Vile whispers he had spread until her reputation was ashes. Hannah's hands shook around the basket, lips trembling. "You ruined my life. And now you want..." The slap came sharp and stinging, her palm burning from the force. Samuel staggered back half a step, anger flashing in his eyes. "Ungrateful," he snarled. "I gave you the chance to be noticed. Without me, you are nothing. She is already everything." The deep voice came from behind. Both turned. Weston stood in the blacksmith's doorway, his shadow long across the dusty street. The wind lifted the hem of his brown coat. His gray eyes locked on Samuel like a mountain blocking the path. Samuel sneered, "This is between me and her." Weston moved forward each step, deliberate, his voice low and cutting. "No. You made it the town's business when you sowed your lies. And you made it mine when you dared step this close." "She has a rotten name." Samuel spat, eyes narrowing. Weston stopped just before him, the distance a single breath. His voice dropped, words edged like steel. "You think honor is something you get to grant. You don't hold the right to define her worth." Samuel's face reddened, cords rising in his neck. "You don't know what she's done? I do." Weston cut in, eyes blazing like forged iron. I know she rises before dawn to do work no one sees. I know she stitches clothes until her fingers bleed. I know she threw herself at wild hooves to save my daughter's life. And I know not one piece of her soul requires your permission to remain whole. The air thickened. Passers-by slowed, watching in silence. The murmurs that rose were no longer mocking, only uneasy. Samuel ground his teeth, but Weston did not waver. At last, Samuel spun on his heel, spitting a curse. "You'll regret this." His figure disappeared into the dusty street. Hannah stood rooted. Her hands shook, the basket slipped apples rolling across the boards. Weston bent, gathered them one by one, set them back into the basket, and placed it gently in her arms. His eyes softened, firm but calm. You don't owe an answer to the past. You only need to live as the woman you are today. Hannah bit her lip tears, streaming not only from fear, but from something deeper. For on that street, in the very town that had mocked her, a man had stood and declared her value beyond rumor, beyond permission. And in that moment, Snowpine was no longer only the town of scorn. It became for the first time the place where Hannah was truly finally seen with respect. Part 7. The Misunderstanding. Night fell over Hollow Ridge like a heavy black curtain. The only sounds the sweep of winter wind across the snowfield and the creak of timber in the small cabin. In the kitchen, Hannah rinsed the last tin cup. The water in the basin had gone cold soap clinging to her cracked hands. She set the cup on the shelf, wiped her hands on her apron, and reached to snuff the lamp when a low voice drifted in from the porch. She froze, heart pounding. Weston's voice. And another familiar. Reverend Emmett, the town's minister. Hannah crept to the small window, the thin curtain no shield against the dark. The wind carried their words through the glass. Weston, the Reverend, said, voice grave, "The child needs a mother. A home cannot stand with only a father and a housekeeper." Hannah's fingers clenched against the wood frame, her breath stalling. Weston's reply came steady, certain I don't need another wife. I only need someone to keep the house to watch over Isla. Hannah has done better than I ever hoped. The words struck Hannah like stones dropped into deep water. Her ears rang. Her breath broke. Only a housekeeper. Each syllable cut sharp cold as a blade. The warmth she thought she'd found, the recognition she had begun to trust. Was it only illusion? Weston did not see her as part of the family, not as someone worth holding on to. She was only a pair of hands, a worker, a housekeeper. She backed from the window, covering her mouth to smother a sob. Her eyes burned, her chest heaved. Isla's innocent words, "Pretty lady," were only the fancy of a child. And Weston had spoken the truth. On the small table in her room lay the carved wooden comb Weston had left for her, its heart-shaped design, simple but tender. Hannah picked it up with trembling fingers, tracing its grooves. She wanted to believe it meant more. But in her ears still rang the phrase, "Only a housekeeper." Tears fell hot against her cheeks. She set the comb down and opened her trunk. There was little to pack: an old handkerchief, a few plain dresses, Isla's childish drawing. Her hands folded each item slowly, as if stalling for time, though her eyes were hollow with despair. Every sound in the cabin seemed thunderous. Hannah moved lightly, careful not to wake Isla, not to face Weston. Her shoes scraped softly on the wooden floor, each step tearing something from her heart. She stopped at Isla's door. Gently, she pushed it open. The girl slept soundly, cheeks pink in the fading firelight, arms curled around the crumpled drawing. Hannah covered her mouth, stifling her sob. "You'll forget me, Isla. Children forget quickly." The door closed without a sound. Hannah slipped on her thin cloak, lifted the small cloth bag, and quietly opened the cabin door. The night wind swept in icy, but the chill in her chest was deeper still. The fields stretched before her silver under the moon. Each step away from the cabin pressed the pain harder into her. Tears blurred her sight, but she forced her legs forward. "If I stay, I am only a burden, a shadow no one needs." Inside, Weston shut the porch door as the Reverend departed. He returned to the room, believing all was still at peace. But within minutes, when he would open Hannah's door and find her bed empty, he would understand his careless words had cut deeper than he ever intended. And so beneath the cold moon, she walked away once more, not driven by the town's laughter this time, but by the shattering of her own heart. Part 8. The blizzard night. The wind howled through the valley like the cries of lost souls. The moon lay hidden behind thick clouds, its faint light spilling only in broken patches across the pine forest. Snow fell endlessly heavy enough to swallow footprints within moments. Inside the small cabin of Hollow Ridge, Isla stirred awake. The room was too quiet. No rustle of Hannah's dress, no gentle scent of herbs from the kitchen. She sat upright, hurried to the next room, only to find the bed neatly made, the wooden comb gone from the table. "No," Isla whispered, eyes wide, breath quickening. She darted to the porch, fumbling with her coat, small hands trembling as they fastened the buttons. The storm raged outside, but Isla did not hesitate. "Hannah," she cried into the wind, her voice swallowed instantly. Her little boots pressed deep into the snow, leaving winding trails behind. Far off, Hannah trudged toward the forest's edge, a cloth bag heavy on her shoulder. The pain of Weston's careless words still burned each step, another cut to her heart. But through the roar of wind, she heard it thin, desperate, unmistakable Hannah, Hannah. She froze, her chest seizing. That voice could only be Isla. The bag slipped from her grasp. She turned, running back, her shoes sinking deep in drifts. Branches whipping her face, the storm's cold biting her skin. Nothing mattered, but one thing: Isla was out here in the blizzard night. Beneath the boughs of an old pine, she saw her, a small figure curled against the trunk. Isla sat shivering, cheeks flushed, scarlet breaths, shallow golden hair dusted with ice, tiny hands stiff and blue. "Sweetheart," Hannah cried, dropping to her knees, pulling the child into her arms. I thought you left forever." Isla's broken whisper cut Hannah's heart. "Shh, no, sweetheart. I'm here." Hannah pressed the girl close, wrapping her body around her, shielding her from the storm. Her own breath came in clouds of white, her tears blurring. Terror squeezed her chest, but still she whispered fiercely, "I will not leave you. I will never leave you." Hoofbeats thundered. Through the white veil of snow, a lantern's glow swayed. Weston burst through the storm coat, rimed with ice breath, ragged. His eyes swept, once then locked on Hannah holding Isla. He dropped to his knees, arms gathering them both. "Thank God," he murmured again and again, forehead pressed to Hannah's shoulder, his voice breaking, trembling. Both of you are safe." Isla sobbed, burying herself between the strength of their embrace. Hannah lifted her gaze, red-rimmed eyes meeting Weston's. And in that moment, the wind, the snow, the night everything fell away. There was only their clasped arms, only the warmth breaking through the cold. The three of them held tight beneath the storm, as though nothing else in the world remained. And for the first time, Hannah felt it fully. She was no longer abandoned. She belonged within these arms, within a family. Part 9. The Proposal in the Storm. The wind roared through the pines, like nature's own trumpet, fierce but sacred. Beneath the ancient trees, the lantern Weston carried cast a trembling gold light over three figures kneeling in the snow. Hannah still clutched Isla to her chest, her body shaking, not only from the cold, but from emotions that stole her breath. Weston held them tighter, his warm breath mingling with the storm's chill. But as Isla drifted into drowsy safety in Hannah's arms, Weston's eyes fixed on Hannah. The gray coldness of the cowboy's gaze was gone. In its place burned a light fierce enough to challenge the storm itself. Hannah. His voice was quiet, but it carried like a vow borne on the wind. She lifted her tear-streaked face, cheeks flushed crimson from the cold. Lantern light carved his face in stone strong, yet trembling with something deeper. "You think what you heard tonight was the truth?" Weston said, his voice rough-breaking. "That you are only a housekeeper, only a hired hand. But that is not what I meant. That is not the truth." Hannah trembled, lips parted, unable to answer. Weston clasped her hand, his warmth seeping through her glove, jolting her heart. "I don't need another wife to replace the past," he went on, voice heavy with pain, but steady. "I need you, not for work, not out of duty, but because I found myself again when I saw you. You brought life back into this home. You made Isla laugh like a child should laugh. And you made me." Weston paused, drawing a ragged breath. "You made me remember that my heart can still love." Hannah choked, hot tears streaming into the cold snow. The storm howled around them, but his words pierced deeper than the wind-mending wounds she thought could never heal. Weston slowly reached into his coat. From his rough palm gleamed a silver ring, worn with years, yet shining bright beneath the lantern's glow. Simple, weathered, but cradled in his hand as though it were treasure. He held it out to her, his voice breaking yet firm as iron. "Will you marry me? Not because I need you, Hannah, but because I choose you." Time stopped. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth, her shoulders trembling, tears flowing freely. She could scarcely believe it after years of mockery, abandonment, and shame. A man had seen her, chosen her. Not from duty, from love. The silence stretched, broken only by the storm. Then a smaller voice chimed in, clear, pure as a silver bell. "Say yes." Isla looked up, eyes shimmering with tears, yet shining with joy. She clutched Hannah's hand tighter, whispering again, stronger this time, "Please say yes." Hannah sobbed aloud. All the pain, all the shame, all the years of loneliness broke apart, replaced by a flood of radiant light inside her chest. She nodded, her voice hoarse but certain. "Yes." Weston exhaled sharply, his shoulders dropping as though 1,000 pounds had been lifted. He slid the ring onto her trembling finger. It fit as if made for her. Then he drew her close, drew Isla close, the three of them bound together in one embrace, while the storm howled in vain. Above them, the ancient pines shuddered, snow falling like blossoms of white. The lantern flickered, but the warmth of their arms burned brighter than the cold. That night, in the heart of the storm, A family was born, not from necessity, but from choice. And that love, kindled in the fiercest winds, blazed like a fire that would never die. Part 10. The Eastward Room. Spring came slowly to Montana. Ice-melted streams murmured around the hills, and on the hollow ridge fields, tender green shoots pushed up like promises. The sharp bite of winter winds gave way to the sweet smell of damp earth and the bright chorus of birds in the old cottonwoods at the valley's edge. That day, the people of Snowpine gathered at Hollow Ridge, not to gossip, not to jeer, but to witness. Beneath the cottonwood tree, wooden benches were set in simple rows. Mason jars brimmed with wildflowers, purple, yellow, white, glimmering in the sun. There was no veil, no silver bells, but the air carried a warmth no grand wedding could match. Hannah stepped from the cabin in a new dress. Pale cream fabric sleeves neatly sewn, every stitch made by her own hand on long nights. No longer the faded wedding gown that bore the stain of mockery, but a plain, pure dress like the woman she had become seen at last with respect. Her hair was pinned a wildflower tucked above her ear, her face flushed with nervous color. Isla marched ahead, clutching a small bouquet, solemn as if on sacred duty. With each step, she turned, waving, calling. "Hurry, pretty." Lady Weston waited beneath the cottonwood. His coat, clean boots polished, but it was the quiet smile at his lips that stilled every voice. He did not look at the crowd, nor at the minister, readying the vows, only at Hannah, as though she were the only one left in the world. When Hannah laid her hand in his, the whispers fell silent. No one spoke of her past. They saw only a woman once scorned, now standing tall, and a man who chose her with all his heart. The vows were simple beneath the green canopy I do. Just 2 words, yet they held the weight of every step they had walked, tears, mockery storms, and moments of life and death. When Weston pressed a kiss to Hannah's hand, Isla burst out, "Yea," and the crowd laughed, their smiles shining through tears. Afterward, no one hurried away. They lingered sharing cakes, cider laughter echoing across the fields. Children chased one another's skirts and trousers dusted with pollen. Snowpine had never known a wedding so modest, yet so full of joy. Weeks later, Hannah woke to the sound of hammering outside. On the porch, she found Weston raising a new wooden frame against the cabin. When she asked, he only smiled, sweat beading his brow. "I'm building you a room, facing east where the sun rises. This house isn't mine alone anymore. It needs a place that belongs to you." Tears stung her eyes. She said nothing, only laid her hand on the fresh timber, warm with resin, her heart trembling with simple happiness. By summer, the room was complete. Inside, Weston had built shelves by hand and set a small table before the wide window. Hannah placed a few worn books and ink bottle stacks of paper. Soon, children from nearby farms gathered on the porch. Hannah sat at the table, her voice gentle as she guided them through letters. Small hands lifted high to answer. Isla sat close, scribbling clumsy words, grinning whenever she looked up. The sight spread through town. The woman once ridiculed in a faded wedding gown was now the teacher of their children. They no longer looked at her with pity, but with gratitude and respect. One evening, as golden light stretched over the valley, Hannah sat alone in the eastward room. On the desk lay the wooden comb Weston had once left at her door, and beside it Isla's crumpled drawing of the pretty lady. She traced the comb with her fingertips, memory flooding back her first walk into the church in her old gown, the weight of mocking eyes. She smiled softly, tears glinting in the sunset. That day, I believed I had to be beautiful in order to be loved. I was wrong. It was love chosen steadfast that made me beautiful. Her words were more than an ending to her own story. They were a truth for anyone scarred by judgment. In the eastward room, the light faded, but the warmth of love endured. True love does not grow from pity or fleeting glances. It exists only in choice and in respect that does not waver. That was what transformed a forgotten woman into one cherished and a lonely cabin into a home. As twilight burned the hollow ridge valley into gold sunlight, poured through the wide window, bathing Hannah's desk in honeyed glow. She sat quietly, pages before her children's books, opened the wooden comb resting in her hand. Tracing its carved heart, she whispered the truth she had lived to learn. Not beauty makes us worthy of love. It is love, steadfast chosen, that makes us beautiful. The words lingered like a blessing, not only for her life, but for all who carried the scars of prejudice. And so in the eastward room, while the day's light faded, love's warmth remained.